Hi everyone, it's Janet Wakeland here with Remarkably Created, and what we're going to do today is we're going to look at some ideas for putting ink directly on your dies that you use for die cutting with the Stamp Cut and Emboss machine or similar die cutting machine, so that's what we're referencing. As I flip the camera around, I do want to take a second to thank all of you for your willingness to pivot just a little bit today with all of the massive storms in the area. Some of you are aware that we live in a very rural town in Louisiana on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain, and the internet is sketchy on a beautiful weather day, but when there's thunderstorms and high winds and it's raining like the dickens outside, internet is really sketchy, and there's nothing worse than having a Facebook Live freeze, or going in and out, or they get scratchy and all kinds of weird. So I appreciate those of you willing to pivot, and I hope that you enjoy this video. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this idea kind of came about. There's this amazing new set of dies called Fabulous Frames, and I've been using them like crazy. And what's really neat, see the inks, that we'll talk about that. But what's really neat about these frames is that they have these little dot marks as well as these little ridges for embossing, and it really adds some nice texture. But I wanted a little bit more, okay? And I didn't want to hand color between the lines or any of that kind of stuff, but I wanted something that would make these pop just a little more. So I was asking myself, what can I do? And I started playing around, and as you can see on this sample here, this is what it looks like when you add a little bit of ink to those dies. So I played around with a couple of different variations, and I'm going to show you what I think works best and kind of showcase for you some dies and things like that, and we'll make a card together. So a couple of things about the dies. When you're looking at dies to add your ink to, a lot of Stampin' Up's dies have these embossing lines in them. They have those embossing marks, so those raised ridges that you're going to see, just like that. And those ones really do pop when you use them with a little bit of ink. And then actually any other die will also work as well, giving you just a hint of an outline on it and a little bit of color, even some fun types of distressing with it. So let's start first with the very first way that I did this, and realize that that's probably the most messy way to do it, but I'm going to kind of show you the progression and save you from making a really big mess yourself. So how does that sound? So one of the very first ways that I did it was I had, and we'll save that one because I want to use that for something different. So one of the first ways that I did, because of course I started with this frame, is I just had my frame on my piece of paper. I opened a whole ink pad. That was the first thing that I thought of, and I just inked it up like that. As you can see, that puts a lot of ink around that die on the piece of paper. But when I work with it and I die cut it, when I flip this over, and I'm not going to die cut here today, we're not going to have it shake because I've got lots of finished ones for you. But when I put it on that piece of paper and run it through, it is going to die cut, and it is going to give me a frame like the one that I just showed you with that outline around it, okay? So, but it leaves that big mess, get a little ink in places maybe that you don't want to get them. Now, one of the first things to be careful of when you do that is, of course, as you pick it up and lay it down. So my first tip is to always start with a piece of paper a whole lot bigger than you want, because you can always trim down to the finished size. Now, even without running it through the die cutting machine, this gives you an example that you can also simply use your dies inked up for outlines and fun shapes. So in this case, I could just take and I could snip around that rectangle in the inside. I could grab a marker, and I could kind of add some doodle lines on that if I wanted to. I could do, some kind of hash stitch marks, just all kinds of fun stuff. So you actually don't even have to die cut them. So the very first thing I tried was an ink pad, and it does work. In lieu of an ink pad, something else to consider is that Stampin' Up! Has something called ink spots. And what these are is these are kind just a little bit bigger than an inch. They're like 1.25 inches by 1.25 inches, and they are raised. Stampin' Up! Sells a set of inked ones. There's this color, there's 10 colors in that, nice assorted colors. You can find them back in the accessory section. Or we also have ones that are uninked that you can add your own color to. And I would recommend having one per color. I wouldn't put some re-inker on it and rinse it out or anything like that. But what's nice about these is that they're a little bit smaller, and you're not going to kind of have as much ink everywhere else that you might not want to have ink, okay? And you can flip it over on your paper. You're going to run it through your die cut, but again, you can also see that you can make shapes with it. But an ink spot would be another way of being able to add that color. So then I kept thinking, okay, well, what else? So I will share with you my favorite way that I have started to ink these up, and that is with our Daubers. Daubers fit kind of over the edge of your finger, and they have a little bit of a sponge on the end. They're actually just kind of fun to play with, and really kind of helps contain that ink. Is just where you want it to be. And so you're going to ink that up. You would put it on your cardstock, and while white's going to give you a nice contrast, when you do them tone on tone, it really makes those designs pop. Okay, so that just shows you tone on tone. I did the same thing. I used my dauber to ink up this frame, and then just to show you what that looks like. So you can see it really makes that images pop around it. So the dauber is by far my favorite way of doing it. But yet, let me show you another idea. And something that finally got me to use my Stamparatus. And all of these I'll simply just take to the sink and rinse off. The ink comes right off of them. It doesn't really dry on it because of the metal surface, and pat them dry. I don't worry about them rusting or anything like that because I'm going to pat them dry right away. So then I wanted to emboss with them. I wanted to try something different. And so I grabbed my Stamparatus, and I'm using the Stamparatus magnet to hold the dies to the top of it. And I simply inked it up with my embossing, with my Versamark, put cardstock in it. And because this is a clear ink, when you press down, you're not going to see it. And what I found was that I really needed either the foam mat in here or a huge stack of papers. I needed something so that the stamp was really on level with the paper and really hitting it. And then I was able to create a really soft and subtle background with gold embossing powder, and simply by inking up my stamps. Again, taking that Versamark and patting it and pushing it down like that. So while we have the Stamparatus, I'll show you another way and another idea for inking these up. Let's put that in my to wash pile. We'll leave that here. And I love this die. Isn't this die amazing? So let's put it on here. It's clean. We'll set it down. We're gonna fold this over. And yes, you could have taped your cardstock exactly where you want it to be. We'll put our magnet on there. When I lift it up, it's gonna grab the die with it. And another way to ink these up is with the brush tip of your Stampin' Right marker. And you're gonna be able to come in here and just add that ink to your die. You don't have to really worry about moving ultra fast because again, you've got that metal. It's not a porous surface that's sucking that ink up, but we're just gonna go ahead and add our ink the whole way. And I'm gonna go ahead and then stamp it on this paper with the Stamparatus, just showing you all of the different options and the way some of these would work. I hope I got every surface there. We're gonna just assume that we did. And we're gonna take that and just press it down really good. Now the benefit of using the brush marker, I'll show you here in 1 second about that. And you'll end up with, well, it's not as dark as I would like it to be, I think. But you're gonna end up with that pattern on the back, okay, with that nice swift surface like that. I still prefer outside of this, but this will keep you a little cleaner. You do need a really well inked. I still just prefer this really hard surface and then putting them down and just giving them a really good rub. But you need a really wet marker, really wet pad. The benefit of using a marker as opposed to a dauber, I can show you that visually with this one here. Can you see the raised edges? And then you've got the indented portion, okay? When you use a dauber, it's very, very hard to stay on just the raised edge. You are going to get some ink in between. If I'm using a marker, I can hold it sideways with that brush tip and just hit the raised edges. I'm not going to get that ink that would settle down in. The same thing happens with your ink spot. The same thing happens with your ink pad, is that you can't not get that ink down inside, if that makes sense. Let me show you a few more samples of some contrasting with and without the ink. So here is this beautiful border piece, and it's really, really hard to see those lines. Even though I shimmed it up to try to really impress those lines in there, it's really hard to see those lines, right? Same shim, same sandwich, but now with a little bit of ink on it. Look at the difference. Look how that pops, right? Big, big difference there. Something fun here with this one, with this frame here. I don't know if you can see the frame. Can you see the ink? It almost looks like I spritzed it, right? But what I did was, before I die cut it, I took and I tapped the ink pad in different spots on it. And that's where your ink spot would come in handy, but I just randomly tapped ink on it. And then I went ahead and die cut it. Let me show you another one yet. I do have finished projects for you as well too. I love this die. This die just die cuts like a stitched pattern that looks like this on cardstock. But what I did here, in this case, I did use the whole ink pad, and I smushed the whole ink pad. How do you lose one ink pad on a table, right? But I smushed the here it is. I took the ink pad, and I want you to see this just so you'll understand, is I just smushed the whole ink pad in. And as you can see, it is going to be getting down in between the leaves as well as on the leaves. And when I die cut it, oh, I think it just turned out so distressed, so cool, and I'm not sure I could do it intentionally on my own. And now I can't wait to add some flowers. But it just looks like really cool old distressed paper. So that's going to be a whole lot of fun. So you're going to find yourself just having all kinds of cool things happen when you play with all of these. So let's move these off to the side, and let's take this piece of paper off. And we'll save that because we always keep them going as long as possible. And for the card that we're going to make, I die cut an element from the Blooms of Happiness, which is part of the Hues of Happiness suite. And it doesn't die cut out a whole image. It literally just puts holes in your paper, in this case in the shape of leaves with little stitched marks. But for the card that we're going to make, I actually went ahead and I inked it up. And I don't know if you can see the little bit of green. See how it just added a little bit of color? And then I embossed it through the embossing folder just to kind of distress that background. So this has a little bit of a green edge to it, and then this is just same white, okay? So I wanted just that little bit of green. So I have some Mellow Moss cardstock as our accent. Let's go ahead and let's put our adhesive on this. This piece of paper here is cut 3 3/4 inch by 5 inches. The piece underneath is 4 inches by 5 1/4. And then I have a piece of cardstock that is 11 inches by 4 1/4. And I love tone on tone layering. It kind of gives you kind of just a real subtle shadow when you layer those pieces on. So there's that little line that goes around. So we've got that, and now we've got the moss popping up as well through, which then complements the ink that went around it, because that is the color that I inked it up with. I have flowers that I have die cut from the Hues of Happiness paper. And let's go ahead and let's pop one of them up. And then the other one, we're gonna tuck in behind. I have some leaves that we've die cut. I'm just gonna put those in. I have a greeting beyond grateful, and this is from the Charming Sentiments bundle. Love that bundle. We can add that. And now if we want to, we can go ahead and we can add some ribbon in. And sometimes you don't want a whole big bow. Sometimes you just want little snippets of ribbon. So in this case, I'm going to take my ribbon, put a little adhesive and adhere it together. I'll do the same thing again. I'm doing it up in the corner. That's where I want the sticky to be. And I'm going to come in and I'm just going to kind of put that little tab, and we'll do a second one the same way. Take our ribbon. We're going to put a little bit of adhesive on it. And only the edges, because you want to form a loop or a tab, whichever way you want to call it. A little bit more adhesive here. And that's one of the reasons why I also use dimensionals on that first layer, so that I could easily come back in and add my little ribbon loops. And I want this one to be a little shorter. Thank goodness for Glue Gun, right? And the ability to get adhesive off of our scissors. We'll lift that up. And now we've got a smaller tab. And then we have a sweet card. So as we finish up, let me show you a couple of other samples. So this was the one that I showed you where we embossed our dies to create just that subtle gold background. Then the first one that I showed you with the frame. My son-in-law has a birthday next week. So this is his birthday card. And I used the exact same technique on the frame. In this case, it's crumb cake, and I used mango medley. So that's his birthday card. He'll love that. And then if you've seen the wisteria bundle at all, the wisteria bundle has some extra dies in it, and those extra dies cut and emboss. So I wanted those images to pop, but I really didn't want to do a whole lot of work or color them or anything. And if you did the leaves without this coloring technique that I showed you, you would just have old olive leaves. But by adding that coloring with a dauber to the veins, when I die cut, now it was already colored. And then the same thing with the hanging wisteria. When I added a little bit of gorgeous grape to the dies, it just naturally colored them. So have some fun with your dies, guys. Play outside of the box. The very worst thing that happens is that you could use up some of your scraps through trial and error, and you can end up with some ink on your fingers. But all in all, you'll have some crafty fun, and you'll find a new use for your dies and things like that. And I love finding new uses for my products, because I like to say that it adds value when I do that. So happy creating, guys.